Welcome to Google Campus in the heart of London's tech city. For years, Europe has been trying to create a startup scene to compete or at least replicate the success of Silicon Valley. Places like this hub for entrepreneurs are part of that effort to make it easier to start and build companies from here in Europe. And last month, Google made an even bigger bet on the continent by announcing it was bringing a $100 million fund to invest in startups across Europe. Easy Vidra has been in charge of Google Campus since it launched in 2012 and is now part of the team running Google Ventures. He believes Europe is at a turning point.
I would say there's three things that changed dramatically. One is the cost of creating a startup has dropped significantly. Two is the density of network in Europe has changed. There's more and more startups, and if you throw a rock, you're likely to hit either a startup or a venture capitalist, and the entire ecosystem has grown. And three is really the level of ambition. Maybe in the past, Europe was labeled as the copycat center of the world, but more and more we have original startups coming out of Europe.
One of Silicon Valley's leading venture capitalists agrees. But as an investor in startups that are now global brands such as Facebook, Twitter, Skype, and Airbnb, Ben Horowitz says European founders need to make sure they launch in the right sector.
If I were to think about starting a new company in Europe, I would think of it with respect to Silicon Valley, kind of the way you think of how a technology company enters the market. You wouldn't do a full frontal assault on Facebook or on Google, like unless you were suicidal. And you probably in the same way wouldn't want to go kind of right into what Silicon Valley is already building if you were kind of coming from Europe. But if you have like a breakthrough new idea, and like Skype was something completely different, completely new, and implemented much better. By contrast, if you're going to say, okay, I'm going to build a new storage company that looks a lot like a Silicon Valley storage company, I think that would be much more difficult to do.
Is this guy always on vacation?
Costa Rica vacay.
State is a communications platform based in London. It was co-founded by Alexander Sayle, who made his name as a co-founder of Silicon Valley-based Jawbone, a wearable technology company famous for its health-tracking wristbands and audio devices. He returned to the UK to launch his latest venture and believes that in some ways Europe has an edge over California.
The difficulty you have in the US that I've seen is that there's been a shift away from core technology to basically what's in vogue. Right? And that's sort of always been the case. I mean, when we started Jawbone, people were investing in .coms. And so we got to a point where we actually called, at the time we were called Aleph, so we got to a point of almost calling ourselves Aleph.com, so people would like take us seriously, which is of course completely ridiculous, even though we were building real technology. And it ended up being the foundation of a very successful consumer product, which was our headset. But for a long time people didn't talk to us because it didn't match the criteria of a .com.
Google's Easy Vidra believes that in some ways, Europe can steal a march on the US.
It's a green field. A lot of the startups that are getting started here in Europe they're the first in their field versus in the US or Silicon Valley specifically, where you have a much more competitive market very early from the start.
Europe is definitely a better place to start and build a business than it was a decade ago. The challenge for founders is to not take Silicon Valley head on at what it does best, but to focus on the advantages that Europe already has. Get that right, and the next billion-dollar global company could be based right here. Ravi Mattu, Financial Times, London.